Hi, I'm excited to be here today to talk to all of you about search, past, present, and future, even if it's to a bit of a rainforest scenario here. And when we think about search, there's a few key components that make up the search experience. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the framework and the lens by which Google considers search. And there's basically four key components. The first component is comprehensiveness. How much information are you searching over? Because it turns out the quality of your answer ends up getting better as the set of information gets bigger. Makes sense, right? You can't find an answer unless you have access to that answer. So by including more information, the number of questions and the quality of the answers you can provide goes up. And that's comprehensiveness. So we're constantly pushing to make Google more and more inclusive of content for the sake of improving our search quality. The next component is relevance. Apples, oranges, and grapes. Which go first? Oranges, apples, or grapes? That's pretty much what we're doing with regard to websites. Which website should go first? Which should go second? What's the best answer we can provide? What's the second best answer we provide? So relevance really comes down to a question of ranking and ordering the results. How can we order the results in the most precise way possible? Speed. Speed has actually been one of the hidden levers that has really driven Google's growth. By making search simple and fast and convenient, it ultimately means that our users are willing to do more searches. So we're constantly improving and working on making Google faster and faster, so the users that we do have end up using the search engine more for searches they might not have otherwise taken the time to do. And finally, there's the user experience. How are the search results laid out? Do they make sense? Are they easy to understand and interact with? Those are all things that go into the user experience part of search. Is it easy or hard to understand what the answers are and what the layout of the page is? And it's these four components that work together, comprehensiveness, relevance, speed, and user experience, that create the entire search experience that you have on Google. And with that framework in mind, we can take a look at where Google's been in the past, where we are today, and where we are in the future, where we will be in the future. So, the early days at Google. In the early days at Google, the web looked like this. And it was small enough that it all fits on one slide. Not really, but the idea is that it is very small. And interestingly, this week marks my 8th anniversary at Google. And I remember the week that I started, the search engine had 30 million pages in it. If you compare that to today, with the tens of billions of pages that now comprise the Google search engine, we've actually grown more than a factor of 1,000 in 8 short years in terms of information. So the information on the web has grown, and you'll see this figure sort of slowly span out. And as that information has grown, it actually has increased the demand for search. In the early days of the internet, there were so few websites that you could actually organize them in just a list. People could just look at a list of websites and click through them. Or they could look at a directory of websites, like Yahoo did. You could actually organize the websites by hand. But as the web exploded in terms of the amount of information available, search became an important and necessary tool in order to actually find information. So we constantly have been working to crawl and include more and more content in the Google search index. And this is the logo that appeared on June 26, 2000. Giga Google. Computer scientists call a billion giga. So we were very excited because in June of 2000, 1 year after I started, we actually had grown to 1 billion web pages. And on this day, it was a big advance for us because we were bringing the search engine to 5 times the size of what it had been for us. And it was about 50% bigger than the next largest search engine. The next largest was about 600 million pages our website was 1 billion. So the way you can think about that is we could actually find 50% more answers than other search engines could find. And that's the benefit of that kind of comprehensiveness. So this is the launch of Giga Google. But of course, increasing comprehensiveness actually has a flip side to it, which is as you include more and more information, relevance and ranking gets harder and harder. You go from just having, say, 4 results to suddenly having 40, and now the order that the results appear in is actually more and more important. So what I've done here is pictured our search result page as it appeared in 1999 or early 2000, and I've shown it in a screen for a reason. We ultimately realized that, well, in the early days of search engines, users got used to sort of hunting and pecking through results, clicking the next button, going through the first few pages to try and find the first result. We realized that our job was to try and provide the best result first, and that if we did our job well, the right result and the best result might be in the first 1 or 2 websites. People wouldn't have to press next. They might not even have to scroll down. And it was that commitment to delivering the best result first that ultimately led to things like the I'm feeling lucky button, which of course is translated into lots of different languages here in Europe, because we felt that our goal was to ultimately produce the best result in the first position on the first web page. And that commitment to relevance benefited us in one unique way, which is it was that relevance, that magic of getting just what you wanted in the first result that led to a lot of word of mouth spreading. So Google has never really advertised our search service. We joked that in early 1998, we realized we had users, we had searches coming in to the search engine, we could see that. But we basically realized that the users were us and our mothers, Larry and Sergey and Craig's in terms of speed and throughout the evolution of Google. If you think about how you answered questions 20 years ago, you would go to the library and ultimately see, you would go, drive to the library, think of a question, go and find a reference books for it, journals, look things up, and find an answer. And what that ultimately meant was a lot of questions went unanswered because you just decided it wasn't important enough to spend a half an hour or an hour ultimately researching that question. So over time, things have evolved. Sometimes you would ask a friend. That's slightly faster than going to the library if you can find the right friend and they have that piece of information. And then with internet search, what we saw happen was people could get their question answered in under a second. And that kind of snappy responsiveness is ultimately what caused Google to grow. And at some point, we are continually trying to improve our speed, and that improvement has yielded more and more searches. At some point, we're going to be up against the constants of physics. But our goal is to have a Google search be as fast as a light beam to and from our data centers from your location. So we're really excited about speed and what that can do for the search experience, and also in our past how we've evolved and pushed on that as a main lever for growth. So I think what I should do now, 10 minutes or so, because I think the questions all of you are asking are in many ways more interesting and more fun than some of these things. But I'll quickly go over at least some of the announcement pieces, and in particular some of the future work. So this is what I was talking about in terms of speed and the way that internet search really has changed the way that people interact with search because it's so much faster. Archie was one of the original internet searches where you actually sent an email in asking for information and emailed you results back, a day later. And so you actually could pass queries through email. And then there was Google search. And as I said, we're basically getting to the point where our goal is to be bounded by the speed of light. How quickly can we answer a user's query? We're actually hitting up against that physical constraint. And we're obviously always working to optimize the speed of queries, especially here in Europe and all around the world, to make sure we're answering our users' queries as quickly as we can. This is the evolution of the homepage over the past 8 years, with basically one screenshot per year. And I think the homepage is an interesting item to watch evolve because one reason our homepage has been so clean is because it's just fast. it loads fast, it's no nonsense. It tells people that our focus is on search, and that's the core of what we do. That's the core of what's on the home page. It also was a bit of dumb luck in that our homepage was this simple to start with because Sergey didn't know very much HTML, so he didn't have the patience to create a very complicated page. But over time, it's become a statement about our user experience, that we put search first, that we put our users first, and that we focus a lot on latency. In terms of search today at Google, how does it look and how does it work? This is the search result page. You'll notice it's not very different than what you saw as a search result page from a long time ago. In fact, as the VP of Search and User Experience, one of my jobs is how does the search engine look and how does it work? And my friends and family give me a hard time because they say, well, if it's your job, how does it look and how does it work? Looks the same. Like, what do you do? Which is an interesting question. But I think the idea here is, over the years, we've interlaced a lot of new functionality and a lot of complication. And the fact that the search result page has remained clean and simple and very user-friendly, in spite of all of those advances, is a testimony to our commitment to user experience. So I talked a little bit during the Q&A session about approximating intelligence and trying to understand a user's intent. What did they type and what did they mean? And over time, we're getting closer and closer to this. So there are things like our spell correction, which here is, so you can see someone mistyping something like Britney Spires, where Spires is a real word. And you actually see web pages that have both Britney and Spire on them. But those aren't the web pages you want. Those are web pages by people who actually think Britney Spears is spelled that way. And they're strictly inferior pages to the ones you get if you actually spell her name correctly. So offering things like did you mean as a correction. We've also offered something that we refer to as alternate queries. This is what I referred to in the Q&A as the survivor example. By looking at users' query revisions over time and analyzing those, as well as the web content itself, we can basically understand, or seem to understand, that Survivor, the television show, isn't on the network ABC in the US. It's on the television network CBS. So by looking at all that data, even though there's not necessarily a human editor in place there, it understands the semantics, or it appears to understand the semantics of what the Survivor television show, how it works. And we've also taken those refinements and begun to apply them to really broad queries. So if you type something like television into Google, we also offer searches related to television on the bottom of the page that help you refine what did you mean. The invention of television, television facts or effects, so on and so forth. Site links is something interesting as well. Here what we found is our commitment to try and bring users as close to the information as we possibly can get them. So if you do a broad query like the BBC, we'll give you the BBC homepage as the first result. We often find that when the people, when they go to the BBC, are looking for 3 or 5 top-level pages, news, sports, weather, and what have you. And rather than having you fumble for that information after doing a search on the BBC site, you ultimately can go right there with one click from our page using a feature like site links. I want to spend a bit of time talking about some of the advancements we've made in language of late. So there was a feature that was rolled out by our engineers in our Haifa Research Center, which does transliteration and makes it possible to type in different languages based on how your keyboard is set. So what you can see here is if you're using Roman English character set, and that's how your keyboard is set, you can still enter searches in Cyrillic for Russian. So it does the transliteration and figures out what word you must be typing. And similarly, it works here if your keyboard is set to type in Hebrew, it actually transliterates it into English. So you can just keep typing without having to change your keyboard back and forth. It makes it easy to enter in different searches regardless of your keyboard settings. There's also the challenge of how do we provide the best possible result relative to where you are, because there are some queries that are ambiguous. So Côte d'Or, is that the right way of pronouncing it, the region here in France? I'm sorry if I'm actually fumbling on the pronunciation. But Côte d'Or in Australia is a very popular kind of chocolate. So when you do the query Côte d'Or in Australia, we provide one English and French result, which is the Côte d'Or website. It turns out the candy company was bought by Kraft, and actually in the result set, we have the Kraft website, and not just any Kraft website, the Australian version of the Kraft website, because these results are angled towards Australian users. But here in Europe, if you're in Belgium and you type Côte d'Or, we think, well, that user might mean the chocolate, or they might mean the region in France. So the first result is the chocolate brand. The rest of the results are written in French about the region in France. And finally, if you run this query from google.fr, what you'll see is all the results are in French, and they're all about the region, not about the chocolate, because we know that based on his past behaviors that French users are usually, when they type Côte d'Or, looking for the region, and they're looking for these web pages. So let's talk a little bit about future and what some of the initial steps are that we've made towards the future, and also how we see that evolving over time. Continuing on that language theme, there's a really exciting prototype that we rolled out last month, which is called cross-language information retrieval. Information retrieval is a fancy way of saying search. So this is cross-language search. We've been investing very heavily at Google for some time in translation technology, automated translation technology. Given a web page or given a piece of text, can we use machines to translate it into another language? And we have a very good translation engine. We've been entering it into international competitions, and it's very good. It's often found to be best of breed. So the idea is to take a person's search, translate it automatically into other languages, search all languages for answers to that query, return the results, and then translate them back into the native language. So to the end user, they typed in their query in a language they understood, and they got results in a language they understood. So here's a diagram of how this would work. And this is, in our first attempt, we're actually having the users declare language pairs. So here, the user says, my language is Arabic, and I want to search results in English. So they can type in Arabic, the equivalent of restaurants in New York. We translate that to restaurants in New York, search English web pages for restaurants in New York, and then use our automated translation engine to translate them back into Arabic. So what the user sees is they typed the search in Arabic, and they got Arabic results. And this is a hugely powerful technology when you think about the idea that a fact or an answer could be written in any language and you could find it. And it's particularly empowering to languages that have only a small amount of content on the web. To date, about 1% of the web is written in Arabic. So this type of translation technology can actually unleash all the power of the information stored in those web pages. And here's another example for things like typing test of words per minute, where again they can they can query it in their native language, get results in their native language while searching English web pages. This is an example of what our whiteboards look like when we talk about relevance and search algorithms. And the idea and the spirit here is building towards universal search. There's lots of complication happening behind the scenes. Our goal is to make sure that the user experience on Google is easy, that it's simple and it's straightforward. And over time, as more and more content has come online, we went about building lots of different search engines. So we had our main web search engine, and then we got the idea to search images. So we built image search. And then we realized that we should build a search engine for news, and one for books, and one for video. And in the end, we have a lot of very good search tools that get good answers for our users. But there's so many search engines, it's almost impossible to know which search engine to use. And that isn't straightforward, and that isn't particularly user-friendly. You almost need a search engine to understand which search engine to use. And so the idea is that we want to break down all those different barriers and bring together one unified product. And that product is universal search. One search box, you go there, you use that search box. It's the default search on google.com. And you'll get embedded in your search not only web pages, but images, books, news, local, and video. And this is just the first step in universal search. There's many more corpora for us to include, blog search, Scholar, and so on and so forth. But it's an important first step to take all of those different types of data and mix them into the result set. So in terms of examples, Steve Jobs is one of the icons that I like to follow. I just think he's fascinating. When I did one of my first queries on universal search, I was electrified by what it did because it took a very standard set of web results and presented on Steve Jobs images about him, news about him, a video of him giving the commencement address at Stanford University 2 years ago, and news archival articles that chronicled his career, all integrated into one result page. No more do you have to go to 5 or 6 different places to try and find the best answer. We query all of those different sources with universal search and bring the best answers back to you. And it really provides for a much more rich experience. So if you look at things like Nosferatu, which is the original monster movie, we've always had a good result. There was an IMDb result there that gives you the meta information about the movie. Who directed it? Who acted in it? How long is it? What's the plot line? But ultimately, you don't get a sense of what Nosferatu is. Now, by bringing in videos, which you can see here is the third result, it turns out Nosferatu is actually on Google Video. Not just a clip, the whole movie. And through universal search, we have the movie right here, including a watch video link. And you don't actually just have to read about Nosferatu, which is what you had to settle for before universal search. You can actually watch and experience the whole movie and get a real sense of what it's about. And there's also exciting items like historical data. So, for example, the query, I have a dream. In the past, it's been easy to turn up the text of the Martin Luther King speech. But ultimately, being able to watch the speech and watch a videotape of that is a much more powerful answer to that search. Universal search is hard. In order to roll it out, we had to clear a bunch of different challenges and make a bunch of changes on our site. The first is that in order to actually gather all those results, do the query on images, do the query on books, do the query on news, why haven't we done that to date? Because it's just been too expensive. So we needed a new infrastructure, which we rolled out last month to support this. We also needed new ranking algorithms, because how do you compare a web result and a news result, or a news result and a video result? How do you rank them relative to each other and understand which one is more relevant? It's very hard. So our search quality team has worked on developing new scoring algorithms to help us understand how to rate these disparate types of content. And finally, there's displaying results. How do you display them? Should you group all the images together? Should you group all the videos together? We've ultimately settled on a rank-ordered list, but we'll be doing more experimentation with this in the future. So that's universal search. And then the final set of slides I have is on personalization, which we had lots of questions about Q&A and also afterwards on this. So to date, we've offered a really powerful product, which is personalized search. What personalized search does is it takes your search history, your queries and your clicks, and it customizes searches to that information. It's completely transparent. You're able to see the search history we've collected on you through an easy link on the top of the page. And it's also opt-in, so you have to elect to use the service in order to achieve personalization of your search results. But that's been our core product to date and our core offering. There are also new avenues we're looking at, like things like our personalized homepage, iGoogle, which has proven very popular, which is another way for us to bring together different types of data and understand more about our users. And I think the really powerful part of all this is based on the information that the users have given us, the way they've taught us about their preferences, we can take information from search history and iGoogle and ultimately work towards the search engine of the future, which is one that understands the preferences that you've expressed to it. So if you want Google to understand where you're located or what type of searches you do or what you click on, you can participate in personalized search and iGoogle and ultimately get results that are customized to you. And that is the end of my presentation, and I will take just a few questions.
Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, which they didn't ask before and they wanted to ask some, can we have the roving mics to get on with it? I'll let you borrow my mic.
Hannu Järvinen from Tietokone magazine Finland. Which part of the documents you translate when you translate them? You translate the headline, of course, in the search results, but then again, if you want it to be useful, you need to translate something else as well. And then the other question, do you have some copyright issues here when you actually are translating somebody else's copyright material and then republishing it in different language? That's basically what you do, right?
So what we do is we translate your query into the target language. So for example, in the example, we translate the query from Arabic into English. Then we search in English. We bring those results back and we translate the titles, the blue links, as well as the snippets to give you a sense of, is this result useful for you or not? And then when you click on a result, we're able to direct you to a special page and a special URL that takes that content and in place translates it. So you can actually see the web page as if it was written natively in that language. And we believe that our implementation is compliant with copyright laws. We've obviously had our lawyers review that. And the initial feedback on this first presentation has been, this first prototype has been quite excellent. People are really excited about the idea of being able to search content that wasn't necessarily written in a language they understand.
The gentleman in the shirt there.
Yes, hello, Christopher Alix from Libération in Paris. You talked a lot about the opt-in option if you want to personalize your Google use. And you said also that the limit where you keep the data of the people is 18 months. And it's also because you don't want to keep the data, so you said it's a compromise. But so as you said that with explicit agreement of the people, you could keep the data longer. So my question is the opt-in program, will it allow to keep the data of the people, I don't know, for 5, 6, 10 years first? And secondly, what would be the interest for the user?
Sure. So I need to be clear about what's currently launched, and some of this was just speculation for future, part of on the question and part of my on mine. So what we've launched to date is we have personalized search, and it's an opt-in form. So you decide if you want to participate in search history and have your search results personalized. Right now, that data is anonymized after 18 months. There's some possibility in the future we would allow people to do an opt-in that would allow us to keep the data for longer, though that is not what's currently in place, and the current opt-in does not keep the data longer than 18 months because users haven't explicitly agreed to have their data kept longer than that. So that would be a separate program that we would roll out in the future. And in terms of the interest of the user, it's an element around, again, personalized is as personalized as you want it to be. And I do think the more data we have, the better we can do in terms of relevance and ultimately providing for those users' needs. So it's possible that if we had more information, we would be able to do a better job with search results, but that's a trade-off that the user should make.
The gentleman there.
Yes, Holger Schmidt, FAZ in Germany. How important is geographical tagging in your videos and images for you? Perhaps in the future, I think you made an acquisition in that direction.
Well, tagging right now for images and videos is incredibly important because we're a text-based search engine. We ultimately need to have text in order to do those queries. I think, as you can see, we're working very hard to make sure that the results we offer in any particular language or any particular country are suitable to that language or country. And so as we evolve things like universal search, it's important for us to understand if a video is particularly relevant or an image is particularly relevant to a locale. So geographic tagging of images and videos isn't particularly important right now. I think as we look at rolling out universal search and really enhancing its relevance, that is something that will become increasingly important.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, yeah. David at the back. And then the gentleman in the green shirt then afterwards.
David Smith of the Observer in the UK. Even though there's couple of examples you showed there, I noticed on the universal searches, Wikipedia figured very highly, and just anecdotally, one or two people I've heard almost sort of complaining about that why does Wikipedia always get such prominence on Google? And it just made me wonder, particularly when news as well is being fed into it, is there at least a discussion to be had about the reliability and authenticity of the information thrown up? For example, searching for news stories, could or should the BBC, who we assume are quite reliable, take priority over somebody's blog entry?
Sure. I think that our overall view is that Wikipedia is a very amazing phenomenon and a great product, and it has a lot of really great information. And we, rather than trying to make individualized judgments about particular sources like Wikipedia, we rely on automated methods like around PageRank. And it turns out that PageRank and a sense of importance is often a user-driven phenomenon. So what we're seeing with Wikipedia is that when there's a page that's particularly well done or particularly authoritative, people, when they mention that concept, right, like the Eiffel Tower, they may link to the Wikipedia entry on that. And that link, of course, feeds into PageRank. It feeds into things like anchor text for the link, which we use as a signal into our search quality function. So those types of links do a lot to buoy up Wikipedia, but it's happening because people like the content and are linking to the content, and they're finding it useful, and that's why you're seeing it in the search results.
Okay, the gentleman in the green.
Hi, two short questions. First one,
Can we have your name and news organization?
Okay, Christopher Jakubik from IDG Poland Publishing House. Two short questions. First one, do you fight in any way with so-called Google bomb? This is probably you know what I'm talking about. And another question is, however, it's hard to imagine functionality of sorting search results in a regular search that in image search. Sorting, for example, by resolution would be very useful. Right now you have only this is medium, this is large or small file, but this is not enough, for example, for journalists to work.
Sure. So for image search, what we actually have is a way of restricting to particular resolution sizes. So it's hard to find sometimes, but there's a pull down on the top of the page that allows you to restrict to small, medium, large, or extra large, which are suitable for wallpaper images. And we encourage people to use that. And it is a common request, so I do think that we need to probably make that more prominent on the interface. And the first question was just, Google bombs. So Google bombs are a phenomenon that occur from time to time that essentially happen because someone sets out to trick the search engine. And if you take two commonly occurring words that occur frequently on the web or in English language or any language, but don't occur frequently on the web, and put them together like miserable failure, what happens is it's possible, because miserable failure hasn't occurred on the web that much together, if you have a lot of links all pointing in one place, it causes the phenomenon where a result turns up. And we have worked very hard to develop algorithms that are capable of detecting when a Google bomb is happening. It's hard because when you look at blogging behavior, for example, it looks sometimes like a Google bomb. Lots of people all setting links to with the same phrase pointing in one place. So it's hard to tell. But interestingly, the few Google bombs that have happened, and I only know of like 5 or less, have all become quite famous. And so interestingly now, when you hear about them, when you hear about miserable failure, our first result is actually the right one, because it usually is what people are looking for. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that because the Google bomb happens and then ultimately gains notoriety, it ultimately becomes the right result for itself. Go figure.
I think we've got time for one last question, which is the lady at the front here, and then...
Hi, Victoria Shannon at the International Herald Tribune. I'm just curious, how far along are you on developing algorithms to search video by image rather than by text? There's a European effort to do the same thing that Google has not yet joined. I wonder if you're going to do that.
There are preliminary efforts, but they're very much in the research phase at the current moment. And they're happening both at Google, they're happening in universities, trying to understand image recognition well enough to do a search of that caliber is something that's of extreme interest in and just is just very useful. But they're not really ready for prime consumption because they have a lot of error rates. They're somewhat problematic. I actually think that just from my own personal views, it's much more likely that we or someone else would develop a good voice-to-text mechanism. And if you actually could extract the voice and the words out of a video and thereby create a transcript that could be searched, that's actually a much more likely way that video would ultimately be searched, because I think the voice-to-text recognition that we have is further along than image recognition.
Okay, everyone, that's great. Thank you very much, Marissa. Thank you very much indeed.